Welcome back to the deep dive. It is so good to have you with us. Today, we're going to do something a little different. Usually, we're racing to keep up with the latest information, right? The newest research, the cutting edge of what's happening. But today, I want to invite you to just slow down with us.
I think we could all use that.
I think so. We're going to step away from all the noise and the frantic pace of our modern lives to look at something truly ancient. We're opening up a source that takes us back thousands of years to a concept that might seem, I don't know, obscure or even confusing at first glance, but it's described in our material as nothing short of a lifeline.
I'm really looking forward to this. Looking over the essay we're discussing today, The Kinsman-Redeemer, a biblical picture of redemption, I have to admit my first reaction was that it sounded a bit dusty.
Right. Academic, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. When I hear Kinsman-Redeemer, I think of ancient legal codes and, long genealogy lists.
Yeah.
But as I started reading, I realized this isn't just history. It feels incredibly relevant. It feels like it's for anyone who has ever felt stuck.
That is exactly right. It is for the person who feels painted into a corner. And frankly, that is a feeling I think many of us know well.
For sure.
Whether it's financial pressure or maybe a broken relationship or just a spiritual heaviness where you feel like you've completely exhausted your own resources.
Yeah.
This concept, it speaks directly to that condition.
And that's what I really want to understand today. I want to get to the heart of God in this.
Yeah.
Because the text we're looking at, it claims that this wasn't just some cultural quirk of the ancient Near East.
No.
It calls it a divine institution. It says this law was a window into God's mercy and his desire for restoration. So help me understand this. Where do we even begin?
Well, we begin with the context.
Yeah.
To really grasp the beauty of the solution, the Redeemer, you have to understand the severity of the problem. And to understand the problem, we have to transport ourselves back to ancient Israel and look at how they viewed two very specific things: land and family.
Oh, okay. Land and family. Now, for us, land is usually just an asset. It's real estate. You buy a house, maybe the market goes up, you sell it, you move. It's a financial transaction.
Precisely. But in the covenantal framework of Israel, land was something entirely different. It wasn't just about economics, it was theological. The essay makes a crucial point here. The land was a sacred trust.
A sacred trust. What does that mean exactly?
It means it didn't ultimately belong to them, it belonged to God. Remember, when the Israelites entered the Promised Land under Joshua, the territory wasn't just up for grabs, it was distributed by lot.
Right. The tribes each got their section.
Exactly. But it went deeper than that. It was an inheritance from the Lord. It was given to specific families within those tribes, and it was meant to stay in that family line permanently. The land was their tangible connection to the covenant promises of God. It was the proof that they belonged to the people of God. It was their place in the kingdom, so to speak.
So, if you lost your land, you weren't just losing your income source. It sounds like you were losing your identity.
That is a very helpful way to put it. You were losing your standing. The source points out that in that agrarian society, if you didn't have land, you didn't have food. That's the practical side. But spiritually, if you lost the land, you risked being cut off from the covenant community.
That's a huge deal.
It's everything. Now imagine this scenario. A famine hits. Or maybe a father makes some really bad decisions, or illness strikes the family. Poverty forces a man to mortgage his land, which essentially means selling the rights to the crops, just to pay his debts.
And if that wasn't enough, if the debt was bigger than the land could cover.
If that wasn't enough, he might have to sell himself or his sons into indentured servitude. He becomes a bondservant. He has lost his freedom, his property, and his ability to leave an inheritance for his children. He's completely destitute.
That is a crisis. And it feels hopeless because if you are a slave, you have no wages to buy yourself back. You are in a hole you cannot possibly dig your way out of.
Exactly. You are powerless. And this is where the genius and the mercy of God's law comes in. This is where we meet the Kinsman-Redeemer.
The Goel.
The Goel in Hebrew. The law of Moses provided a safety net for exactly this situation. If a man fell into that level of desperation, the nearest male relative had both the legal right and the moral duty to intervene.
So it wasn't just a nice thing to do if he felt like it. It was a duty.
It was an obligation of kinship. The word redeem here literally means to buy back. The relative was expected to step in and buy back what was lost, and the source highlights two primary functions of the Goel that we really need to understand to get the whole picture.
Okay, let's break those down for us.
So the first is economic redemption. This is about the land. If a man had to sell his field, The kinsman-redeemer would step in and pay the debt to the creditor so that the land would return to the original family's possession.
So he pays the price, but he doesn't get to keep the land for himself. It goes back to the relative who lost it.
Correct. The goal wasn't to enrich the redeemer. The goal was to restore the impoverished relative. It ensured that the blessings God intended for that family weren't forfeited forever. It was a mechanism to stop a temporary tragedy from becoming a permanent generational curse. It kept the family in the story.
That's profound. I mean, it's putting people above profit, community above individual gain.
That's the heart of it. But you mentioned two functions. What was the second? The second function is perhaps even more alien to our modern sensibilities, but it is absolutely vital for the story we're going to look at later. It is called levirate marriage.
I've heard of this. This is the law regarding widows, isn't it?
Yes. In ancient Israel, the greatest calamity wasn't just poverty. It was the extinction of your family line. If a man died without an heir, specifically without a son to carry on his name would be blotted out of Israel. It was a form of finality that was terrifying to them.
So the lineage just ends.
Unless there is a redeemer. The law allowed, and in fact encouraged, the nearest kinsman to marry the childless widow. But here's the catch, and this is where you see the truly sacrificial nature of the law.
Okay.
The first son born from that union would not carry the redeemer's name.
He would carry the dead husband's name.
Exactly. He would be raised up as the heir of the deceased man. He would inherit the deceased man's land.
Wait, let me just pause on that for a second. So if I am the redeemer, I am agreeing to marry this widow, which is a financial burden, to take care of her household and to raise a son. But that son isn't technically mine in the legal record. And the land I might have just paid to redeem goes to him, not to my own other children.
You're seeing the cost.
From a modern perspective, it sounds like a terrible investment strategy.
From a purely selfish economic standpoint, it is a terrible investment. But that brings us to the why behind this law. Our source puts it this way. It prioritized the community and family line over individual preference. It was an embodiment of God's justice and compassion. God was effectively building a system that said, I will not let the poor be crushed. I will not let the widow be abandoned. I will not let a family name be extinguished just because they hit hard times.
It's a safeguard against hopelessness. It effectively says that as long as you have family, you have hope.
Exactly. It reminds us that in God's economy, people are always more important than possessions. The strong are commanded to use their strength to lift up the weak.
So that's the legal framework. We have the land, the lineage, and this figure of the Goel who is supposed to save the day. But legal codes can be, a little dry. The essay moves us from the law to a narrative, and that's a famous one.
The story of Ruth. It is the perfect case study. If you want to see the kinsman-redeemer in high definition, you look at the book of Ruth. And we need to recognize that this story starts in a very, very dark place. It does not start with romance. It starts with funerals.
It starts with Naomi.
Yes, Naomi. The text tells us she and her husband and their 2 sons left the promised land because of a famine. They went to Moab, which, by the way, was not a friendly place for Israelites. It was a place of exile, spiritually speaking.
And while they're there, everything just falls apart.
Everything. Her husband dies. Then, about 10 years later, both of her sons die. So now you have 3 widows left in a patriarchal society with no means of support. Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem, and her Moabite daughter-in-law, Ruth, clings to her and refuses to leave. But when they get back to Bethlehem, the source highlights Naomi's state of mind. She is absolutely devastated.
I remember the verse. It's so raw. She tells the women of the town not to call her Naomi, which means pleasant. She says, call me Mara, which means bitter.
That's right. She says, the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. I want us to sit with that word for a moment. Empty.
It's a heavy word.
It is the condition of the fall, isn't it? She has no land. It's either alienated or mortgaged. She has no heirs. She has no husband. She has no security. She is the definition of the vulnerable person the law was written to protect. She feels completely abandoned by God.
But she isn't totally alone. She has Ruth.
She has Ruth, and this is where the turning point begins, though they don't see it yet. They're hungry, so Ruth goes out to glean in the fields.
Just to clarify for our listeners, gleaning was another one of these legal provisions for the poor, wasn't it?
It was. It's beautiful, really. God commanded farmers not to harvest the very corners of their fields or pick up any grain that they dropped during the harvest. They were to leave it for the poor, the widow, and the foreigner. It allowed the poor to work for their food with dignity.
So Ruth is out there just picking up leftover stalks of barley.
And by the providence of God, the chance that is not chance at all, She finds herself in the field of a man named Boaz.
Enter the hero. Tell us about Boaz.
The source material describes Boaz as a man of standing. This means he's a man of wealth, of influence, and most importantly, of integrity. And crucially, the text reveals he is a relative of Naomi's late husband.
So he qualifies. He's a kinsman.
He qualifies. But notice his character from the very beginning. He arrives at the field, he sees this foreign woman, and he asks his foreman about her. He learns she is one who has been so faithful to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and Boaz goes way, way beyond the minimum requirements of the law.
How so?
He could have just let her glean and ignored her. That's all the law required. Instead, he approaches her. He speaks to her directly, which was unusual. He offers her protection from the young men. He invites her to drink from his water jars, which is a huge act of hospitality.
And he tells his workers to help her, right?
Yes, he quietly orders his workers to actually pull out healthy stalks from the bundles and leave them on the ground for her to find.
That is beautiful. He's not just following the rules. He's showing heart. He's showing mercy.
He is showing Hesed covenant kindness. And there is a key quote in Ruth chapter 2 that the essay highlights. Boaz says to her, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge."
Under whose wings? I love that image. It's protection. It's safety.
It is. And when Ruth comes home with all this grain, Naomi asks where she was. When she hears the name Boaz, it's like a light bulb goes on. She wakes up from her bitterness. She realizes, wait a minute, this man is a near kinsman. He is one of our redeemers. And hope begins to dawn.
So Naomi comes up with a plan, and this leads to the famous scene on the threshing floor. Now, I've heard this explained in many different ways, but our source treats this very carefully, doesn't it?
It does. It is so important to read this through the lens of that culture, not ours. Ruth goes to Boaz at night while he's sleeping at the threshing floor, which was a public, open space. She uncovers his feet and lies down. When he wakes up, startled, she makes her request. She says, "Spread your garment over your servant, for you are a kinsman-redeemer."
So she's proposing marriage, essentially.
She is. And notice the language she uses. She asks him to spread his garment or spread his wing over her. She is throwing his own words right back at him.
Oh, wow.
Earlier, he said she had come for refuge under God's wings. Now she is asking him to be the instrument of God's protection. She is asking him to redeem her and to redeem her family line.
That is incredibly bold. I mean, she's a destitute foreign widow asking a wealthy, established man to take her on.
It is an act of incredible faith. And Boaz isn't offended. He blesses her. He calls her a woman of noble character. But then he drops a bombshell. He wants to do it, but he says there is a problem.
The legal complication.
Yes. He acknowledges that there is a nearer relative than he is.
Someone else is first in line.
Exactly. Boaz has too much integrity to just ignore that. He respects the law. He cannot usurp the right of the closer kinsman, but he makes an oath to Ruth. He says, "As surely as the Lord lives, I will do it if the other man refuses."
He is willing. That's the key right there.
He is willing. And that sets the stage for the legal resolution. The scene shifts to the city gate, which was the town courtroom, basically. Boaz sits down with 10 of the elders and calls over this other relative. And this interaction is just fascinating because it perfectly illustrates the cost of redemption.
Walk us through that conversation. It's so clever.
It is. Boaz presents the situation. He says, Naomi is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. He asks the man, "Do you want to redeem it?"
And the man says yes at first, right?
Initially, yes. He says, "I will redeem it." And why wouldn't he? From a business perspective, it's a good deal. He pays the debt, he gets the use of the land, and since Naomi is too old to have children, the land will eventually be fully absorbed into his own estate. It's all asset, no liability.
He's just doing the math in his head.
He is. But then Boaz plays his trump card. He says, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property."
And that just changes everything for him.
The man immediately retracts his offer. He says, "Then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate."
Endanger my own estate. That is such a telling phrase. It's all about him.
It is the voice of self-preservation. He realizes that if he marries Ruth and has a son, that son will inherit the redeemed land. The money he spent to buy the land is gone. The land leaves his immediate family to go to Ruth's son, and he has to pay to raise that child. He loses money. He effectively says, "It's too expensive. The cost is too high. I can't do it."
But Boaz.
Boaz steps up. The other man takes off his sandal and hands it to Boaz, which was the way they sealed a contract back then. And Boaz makes the public declaration. He buys the land, he marries Ruth, he redeems the line, he accepts the cost that the other man refused to pay.
And what is the outcome of that sacrifice?
The outcome is total restoration. The elders bless the union. Ruth conceives and gives birth to a son named Obed. And the women who saw Naomi come back empty now say to her, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a redeemer." Naomi holds that baby in her arms, and her emptiness is filled.
And the source connects the dots for us regarding that baby. It's not just any baby.
Yes. And this is the breathtaking part of the story. The camera, so to speak, zooms out. Obed becomes the father of Jesse, and Jesse becomes the father of David.
King David.
And from the line of David comes the Messiah, Jesus Christ.
So if Boaz hadn't stepped in, if he had been like the other guy and just worried about his own estate.
The human lineage of Jesus would have been broken. God used this specific law and the faithfulness of this one man of integrity to preserve the line that would lead to the Savior of the world. What began in bitterness and famine ended in a restoration that affects every single one of us listening to this today.
That is an amazing story. But the essay argues that it's actually more than just a story. It calls the narrative of Ruth a living parable.
Yes. And this brings us to the theological significance of our deep dive today. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to understand the heart of God. Well, here it is. Boaz is what theologians call a type. He's a picture, a shadow of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so let's break that down. The essay lists specific qualifications for a kinsman-redeemer. It seems there were 3 main boxes that had to be checked off.
That's right. To be a redeemer, one had to be. First, a near relative. You had to be kin. Second, you had to be able to redeem. You needed the resources. And third, you had to be willing to redeem. You had to choose to do it.
And the argument is that Jesus is the only one who fits these for all of humanity.
Precisely. Let's look at the first one, a near relative.
This seems fundamental. Boaz could only help because he was related.
Exactly. Now, think about God. God is spirit. He is the creator. We are the created. In his divine nature, he is not our relative in a biological sense. He is distinct from us, holy, other.
So as God alone, he couldn't be our kinsman-redeemer.
Not within the framework of his own law. To redeem humanity, he had to become part of the human family. This is the theology of the incarnation. The source references Hebrews 2.14, which says, "Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity."
He had to become one of us to save us.
He had to. He couldn't redeem us from a distance. He couldn't just issue a decree from heaven and, fix everything. He had to put on flesh. He had to be born. He had to become our brother. By becoming human, Jesus established the kinship rights necessary to redeem us.
That really deepens the meaning of Christmas for me. It's not just a sweet story about a baby. It's a legal necessity for our salvation.
It is. Absolutely. Now, the second qualification, he must be able to redeem.
In Boaz's case, that meant he had to be rich. He had to have the money to pay off Naomi's debts.
Right. But for humanity, our debt isn't financial. We can't pay God back with silver or gold. Our debt is sin. Our land, our inheritance, our right standing with God was lost in the fall. We are spiritually bankrupt, and a bankrupt person cannot bail out another bankrupt person.
So what is the currency of redemption for us?
The essay points us to 1 Peter 1, verses 18 and 19. It says, "For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect."
Without blemish.
That is the key. If Jesus had sinned even once, he would have had his own debt to pay. He would be like that nearer kinsman, unable to help because of his own liability. But because Jesus lived a perfect, sinless life, he possessed the infinite merit, the infinite righteousness required to pay the price for all of us. He satisfied divine justice. He had the wealth of righteousness to cover our poverty.
So he is our relative, and he is able. But then there's a third one, and I think this is where the emotional weight of it all really lands.
Yeah.
He must be willing to redeem.
Yes. This is crucial. Boaz didn't have to do it. The law gave him the option to refuse, just like the other relative did. Boaz chose to redeem. He saw the need, he saw the cost, and he willingly paid it.
And Jesus.
The source connects this to John chapter 10, verse 18, where Jesus is talking about his own life, and he says, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord."
He wasn't forced. He wasn't a victim of circumstance.
No, it was a voluntary act of love. He saw our condition, our emptiness, our spiritual slavery, our inability to save ourselves, and he moved toward it. He didn't say, "This will impair my inheritance." In fact, Scripture says, though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor. He took the loss. He embraced the cross. He paid the ultimate cost knowing exactly what it was because he wanted the bride.
The parallels are just incredible. Boaz takes Ruth, a Gentile, a foreigner, and brings her into the family of Israel.
And Christ takes the church. That's us, people from every tribe, tongue, and nation who were strangers to the covenants of promise. And he brings us into the very family of God. He fulfills that ancient promise to Abraham that all the families on earth would be blessed through him.
It really is a perfect picture. It's like God planted this seed in the law of Moses, watered it in the story of Ruth, just so we would recognize the fruit when Jesus finally arrived on the scene.
That is beautifully said. It shows the incredible unity of the Bible. It's all one story pointing to him.
So we've walked through the history, we've seen the narrative, we've grasped the theology. But I want to bring this home now. For the person listening right now, maybe they are in the middle of a really difficult week, maybe they're making hard decisions. How do we apply the Kinsman-Redeemer to our actual day-to-day lives?
That's the most important question, isn't it? And the source material offers 3 very practical applications that I think are helpful for us to chew on. The first one speaks to anyone who is currently living in what we could call a Naomi moment.
You mean feeling empty? Feeling like life is bitter?
Yes, loss, grief, disappointment, bitterness. Maybe you feel like God has dealt harshly with you. Naomi was honest about her pain. She said, "The Lord has brought me back empty."
I think a lot of people feel that way, but are afraid to say it out loud.
Yeah.
They feel abandoned, and they feel guilty for feeling abandoned.
Right. But the lesson from Ruth is that God is not absent in our emptiness. Think about the timeline. When Naomi was sitting in Bethlehem complaining that she was empty, Ruth was already working in Boaz's field. The Redeemer was already taking notice of her. The solution was already in motion. Naomi just couldn't see it yet.
That is a very comforting thought. Providence is working in the background even when we can't see the results.
Exactly. God is quietly weaving threads of redemption that we may not see for weeks or months or even years. The source says providence is leading toward fullness. So the application for us is this. Don't judge the end of your story by the chapter you're in right now. Wait on the Redeemer. Trust that he is at work.
That's powerful. What's the second lesson?
The second one is a challenge to us as believers. It is the call to mercy. We spend a lot of time thanking God that we have been redeemed, and we should. But we are also called to mirror the character of our Redeemer.
We need to be like Boaz.
We need to be like Boaz. He didn't just stick to the letter of the law. He displayed active compassion. He looked for the vulnerable. He used his resources, his strength, to protect and provide. The essay argues that as people who have been redeemed by Christ, we are called to do the same for others.
So practically, that means looking for the Ruths and the Naomis in our own lives.
It means seeing the weak, the marginalized, the poor in our communities, and not just offering thoughts and prayers, but offering gleaning opportunities, offering protection, offering substance. We need to be willing to impair our inheritance a little bit, to sacrifice our own comfort or time or money to help others. That is the spirit of Christ.
That's convicting. It's easy to accept grace, but it's much harder to extend it when it costs us something. What is the third and final lesson?
The third lesson is about assurance and hope.
How so?
Well, the story of Ruth ends in a wedding and a birth. It ends in joy and fullness. The essay reminds us that while we have been redeemed by Christ, the price is fully paid, we are living in the already but not yet.
We're waiting for the final consummation of all things.
Right. We have been betrothed, in a sense. We are part of the family of God. We have the Holy Spirit as a deposit, a down payment, guaranteeing our inheritance. But we are waiting for the Redeemer to return and set the whole world right, to wipe away every tear and make all things new.
So we live with a certain kind of expectation.
We live with a secure hope. It's not wishful thinking. We know how the story ends. The land will be restored. The family will be together forever. It's a settled reality.
You know, tracing this all the way through really changes how I view the Old Testament laws. They aren't just a bunch of arbitrary rules designed to trip people up. They are shadows of a love story.
They are. It's one long, beautiful story of God refusing to let his people go, refusing to leave them in slavery.
So if we had to summarize this whole journey we've been on today in this deep dive, what would you say is the main takeaway?
I'd say this. We saw God's incredible mercy in the law, that he cares about the vulnerable and makes provision for them. We saw his quiet providence in the story of Ruth, that he works in the messiness of our lives to bring about his good purposes. And we saw his great salvation in the person of Jesus.
The true and better Kinsman-Redeemer.
The ultimate one. The source quotes Galatians 4, verses 4 and 5, which really ties it all together beautifully. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship.
Adoption to sonship. That's the restoration of the family. That's being brought home.
That is the heart of the gospel. The Redeemer has come. He has acted. Your inheritance is secure.
And that gives us a confidence that goes way beyond just hoping things turn out okay.
Yeah.
It's a solid foundation to build your life on.
It is. And I want to close our time together by drawing our attention to the final encouragement from our source material. The essay ends by quoting a man who understood suffering perhaps more than anyone else in the Bible, aside from Jesus himself. Yes, Job. A man who lost his land, his wealth, his children, and his health. He was in the deepest pit of emptiness imaginable. But in the middle of all that pain, he made this declaration of absolute confidence.
Job 19.25.
I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth.
That is a rock-solid place to stand no matter what else is shaking.
It is. And in light of that scripture, I just want to offer a simple blessing to you, the listener, as we wrap up this deep dive. May you walk today in the deep confidence that your Redeemer lives. May you know that he stands for you, that he has secured your future, and that even in seasons of emptiness, he is working to bring you into his everlasting fullness. Go in his grace and peace.
Amen.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.